In 2007, 1 out of every 3 phones sold on planet Earth had a single name printed on it: Nokia. It was the most powerful brand in technology, a Finnish giant that had crushed every rival for over a decade. And then, in the space of about 5 years, it would vanish from the shelves almost completely. Not because it ran out of money, because it made one enormous bet about the future and lost. But here is the part almost everyone gets wrong. Nokia did not die. The company is still here today, very much alive, quietly running a huge share of the world's telephone networks. What died was something else: the Nokia in your pocket, the king of the mobile phone. This is the story of how the most dominant phone maker the world had ever seen lost its entire kingdom and never got it back. To understand the fall, you have to see how absurdly high the throne was. Nokia did not begin as a technology company at all. It started in 1865 as a paper mill on a river in Finland. Over the next century, it became a sprawling conglomerate that made rubber boots, car tires, cables, televisions, even gas masks. For most of its life, Nokia was a company you had never heard of, from a country most of the world could not find on a map. Then, in the early 1990s, a new leader named Jorma Ollila made a radical decision. He would sell off the boots and the tires and the televisions and bet the entire company on one emerging idea: the mobile phone. It was a wild gamble. Mobile phones were expensive bricks used by almost no one. But Nokia saw where the world was going before almost anyone else, and it went all in. The timing was perfect. A new digital standard called GSM was about to turn the mobile phone from a rich man's toy into something ordinary people could carry. In 1992, Nokia released the 1011, one of the first mass-produced GSM phones in the world. The wave Nokia had bet on was not a passing trend. It was one of the fastest technology adoptions in human history, and Nokia was riding the very front of it. By 1998, Nokia had done the impossible. It passed Motorola to become the #1 mobile phone maker on the planet. Not in Finland, not in Europe, in the world. A company that a decade earlier was still selling rubber boots now sat at the very top of the hottest industry on Earth. And it was only getting started. What came next was a golden age. Nokia phones became famous for one almost mythical quality: they were nearly indestructible. You could drop one down the stairs, run it under a tap, drop it off a roof, and it would still work. The Nokia 3310, released in the year 2000, became a global legend. So tough that to this day, people joke it could survive a nuclear blast. It was more than a tool. It was culture. That tiny green screen introduced hundreds of millions of people to their very first mobile game, a simple, addictive line called Snake. The custom ringtones, the swappable colored covers, the little startup chime of 2 hands reaching toward each other. For an entire generation, Nokia was not a phone brand. It was the phone. And then Nokia did something no company had ever done. In 2003, it launched the Nokia 1100, a cheap, simple, rugged phone built for the developing world. It went on to sell more than 250 million units, making it the single best-selling mobile phone in history and one of the best-selling electronic devices of any kind ever made. Nokia was not just winning, it was rewriting the record books. By 2007, Nokia stood at a height almost no company ever reaches. It controlled around 40% of the entire global mobile phone market,
Roughly 2 out of every 5 phones sold anywhere on Earth were Nokias. It was worth around $100 billion, one of the most valuable companies in Europe, and the undisputed king of an industry it had helped invent. From up there, the view must have looked permanent. But on January the 9th, 2007, in San Francisco, a man in a black turtleneck walked onto a stage and changed the ground beneath Nokia's feet forever. Steve Jobs held up a small glass rectangle with no keyboard, no buttons, just a screen you touched with your finger, and called it the iPhone. It was the birth of a completely new kind of phone, and Nokia, the king, was about to make the worst call in its history. Nokia looked at the first iPhone and was not impressed. And on paper, it had reasons. The iPhone was expensive. Its battery barely lasted a day. It had no physical keyboard. It could not even send a picture message. It ran on only one slow network in one country. Nokia's own engineers had tested touchscreens for years and knew every one of their weaknesses. So the giant shrugged. It had beaten every challenger before. This one would be no different. What Nokia missed was that the iPhone was not really selling hardware. It was selling software, an app store, a whole new experience. And in 2008, a second wave hit. Google released Android and gave it away free to any phone maker who wanted it. Now Nokia faced 2 enemies at once: Apple owning the luxury top and a free Android army flooding everything below. The war had changed shape, and Nokia was still fighting the last one.
Here is the cruelest part. Nokia was not actually behind on technology. It had touchscreens, app ideas, even internet-connected phones in its labs years before Apple. The problem was inside. Its software, an aging system called Symbian, had been patched and stretched for so long that building modern apps on it was a nightmare. And the company had grown so large, so proud, and so tangled in its own bureaucracy that it simply could not move fast enough to fix it.
For 3 critical years, Nokia argued with itself while the world moved on. It kept shipping new phones running the old software, each one a little better, none of them the answer. Meanwhile, the iPhone got faster and Android got everywhere. Every month Nokia hesitated. Its single greatest asset, its brand, was quietly turning from a symbol of the future into a symbol of the past.
In 2010, with the empire visibly cracking, Nokia did something it had never done in its history. It hired an outsider to run the company, its first ever non-Finnish chief executive, a Canadian named Stephen Elop, who had come straight from Microsoft. He inherited a company that was still enormous, still selling hundreds of millions of phones a year, but sliding, and he decided what it needed was shock therapy. In February 2011, a memo from Elop leaked to the world's press. In it, he compared Nokia to a man standing on a burning oil platform in the freezing North Sea. The man has only one choice: stay and burn, or leap into the icy black water far below and hope to survive. Nokia, Elop wrote, was that man. Its platform was on fire. It had to jump. It was one of the most brutally honest things a chief executive has ever said about his own company.
Days later, Elop announced where Nokia would jump. Not to Android, not to its own new software. Nokia would kill Symbian and bet its entire smartphone future on Microsoft's Windows Phone, a platform that almost no one was using. His old employer would become his lifeboat. It was the single biggest decision in the company's modern history, and many now believe it was the fatal one.
But there was a trap. By publicly declaring Symbian dead, Nokia told the entire world to stop buying its current phones before the new Windows phones were anywhere near ready. Why buy a Nokia today if the company itself just told you it was a dead end? Sales of the phones that were actually paying the bills fell off a cliff. Nokia had set fire to its own present to reach a future that had not arrived yet.
The collapse was staggering in its speed.
In 2012, after 14 straight years at number 1, Nokia was overtaken by Samsung as the largest phone maker in the world. 14 years of total dominance, undone in about a year. The Lumia phones running Windows finally arrived, and some were genuinely good, but the world had already moved on. Everyone was buying iPhones and Androids. The apps, the developers, the momentum were all somewhere else.
By 2013, it was over. Nokia agreed to sell its entire mobile phone business, the very heart of the company, the thing that had made it famous, to Microsoft for around $7 billion. For a company that had been worth well over $100 billion just a few years earlier, it was a fire sale. In April 2014, the deal closed. The Nokia phone, as the world knew it, no longer belonged to Nokia.
And then came the final humiliation. Microsoft could not save it either. Just over a year after buying the phone business, Microsoft wrote off almost the entire purchase, around $7.5 billion, and cut thousands of jobs. The Windows phones were quietly killed off. The factories that had once flooded the world with Nokias went silent. The most famous name in the history of mobile phones had been erased from the market in less than a decade.
And here is where this story turns. Because unlike almost every other fallen giant, Nokia, the company, did not go into the ground with its phones. Remember, it had sold the phone business, but it kept the rest. Nokia still owned something quiet, unglamorous, and enormously valuable. The equipment that runs the mobile networks themselves. The towers, the systems, the invisible backbone that every call and every piece of data travels through.
So, Nokia did the one thing that most dying companies never manage. It became something else. In 2016, it bought a rival network company, Alcatel-Lucent, and reinvented itself as one of the largest telecom infrastructure companies on the planet. Today, if you are watching this on a phone anywhere in the world, there is a real chance the network carrying it to you is powered, in part, by Nokia. The brand you thought had died is running the pipes underneath everything.
The name even returned to the shelves. In 2016, a Finnish company called HMD Global licensed the Nokia brand and began putting it on new Android phones, even reviving the legendary 3310 as a nostalgia piece. But these were Nokia phones in name only, made by someone else entirely, a ghost of the empire wearing the old crown. The king had a statue in the town square. The king himself was never coming back.
So what really killed the Nokia phone? Not Apple, not Google, not even the Windows bet by itself. What killed it was the thing that quietly kills almost every giant. Success made it certain. It had won for so long, so completely, that it could not believe the ground was moving. It saw the iPhone, it saw Android, it saw the future arriving, and it trusted its own past instead. By the time it finally jumped, the fire had already spread.
There are two lessons buried in this wreckage, and they point in opposite directions. The first is a warning. No lead is ever safe. You can own 40% of a market, be worth $100 billion, and be nearly wiped out in 5 years by a device you laughed at. But the second is stranger, and almost hopeful. A company can lose its entire kingdom, the one thing it was famous for, and still refuse to die, if it is willing to become something it never planned to be. The phone that a whole generation grew up with is gone from the stores. The company that made it is more alive than ever, just wearing a face you would never recognize. That is the strange fate of Nokia. Not a death, but a disappearance.